So it's 4 o'clock now, and there's a lot of people who are still logging on. So I'm just gonna do a quick introduction of myself and this process while we let some more people log on. And then we'll get going. So my name is Sheridyn, and I'm an intern at the Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago. I'm an art history and fine arts student at Columbia College, although I'm originally from Texas, which is why this Zoom meeting is going to be a remote demonstration and workshop from my home in Texas, which is why you have the lovely fireplace behind me. I'm currently going to be giving you this Zoom demonstration from my living room and also my very cute backyard. So if you're wondering why the situation looks how it is, I'm sure everybody's well aware we're just doing a remote demo. And another thing that someone may or may not be noticing is the fact that the light is pretty dim at the moment. And the reason why the light is dim on camera right now is because this is a photosensitive workshop. This is a photosensitive process. So right now I have it dim in here actually to prevent any accidental exposure of the materials before I'm ready. Another thing too is that right now it's just going to be facing on me so I can talk to you, but when I'm actually demonstrating things, I'm just going to turn my laptop screen down so that you can see my actual materials and my hands and what I'm doing. But that's kind of the outline of how this demo is going to go. So we're going to do a cyanotype demonstration. Cyanotype is a really wonderful and easy to learn, easy to do from home printmaking process that uses a 2-chemical solution and UV rays. So it's a really great, accessible process. And I learned it when I was studying with, well, I learned it when I was a studio assistant studying with an artist from Ecuador, Juana Cordova, and then also a local Texas artist, Sarah Fox. So I'm gonna teach you the way that they taught me, and I'm also gonna teach you 2 different processes. I wanna teach you these 2 different processes so that if you want to do this on your own, you can decide which process works best for you, what's most convenient for you, and what's most affordable for you. This entire process should really not be too expensive, but there are less expensive ways to do it, but overall it's very inexpensive and accessible. So the 2 processes that I'm going to show you are going to be a DIY cyanotype method, and that just means that I'm going to show you how to make a cyanotype print every step from beginning to end. And then the other process I'm going to show you is kind of a prefab process, which turns just as great results, and it just saves you a bit of time on the front end, because instead of making your own photosensitive material, you're going to be buying some pre-treated photosensitive fabric sheets from the brand Jacquard. And all the materials that are store-bought, I'm going to tell you are Jacquard. So that's going to be the chemicals that we're using, and then also the pre-treated sheets. That's a really great cyanotype brand. So if you're wanting to do this process, I would definitely highly recommend them because I've used them and they're fail-safe every time. So that being said, it looks like we have a lot more participants. So I am going to get started with starting the DIY method. I'm gonna have these processes staggered, but I promise it's gonna be very clear just for the sake of time. But let's start with that. So for the DIY method, you're going to create your own photosensitive material. And the way that you're going to do that is that you can buy a photosensitive chemical kit. It's called a sensitizer kit. And from the Jacquard brand, it's 2 bottles that look like this. So you have your part A, which is potassium ferricide, and part B, which is ferric ammonium citrate. Both of these are fairly harmless chemicals. That's nothing caustic that's going to damage your skin or kill your plants. The only thing to be wary about them, and the reason why I'm going to wear gloves at certain portions, is just because of the fact that they have a very, very strong dye. So I don't want to get any of that dye onto my clothes, and I don't want to get it onto any fabric or surfaces because it's a really bright yellow. I'm not entirely sure how well it washes out, so I would just advise using gloves if you don't want these like bright colors on your skin, like yellow or green sometimes. But anyways, so when you buy these from the store, well, when you buy these, you can buy them online like I did remotely, or you can buy them in store at an art supply store. They're in powdered form, and then you add water to them, and you just fill water up all the way to the top, and you shake them really good. I shake them already multiple times this morning, but I'm gonna do it again right before we start, just to make sure that all of that powder is dissolved into the solution. I'm gonna turn my screen down now so you can see what I'm doing. Have my little workstation here. So when you're gonna be mixing these chemicals, it's really simple. You're just gonna be mixing an equal amount of solution A and solution B and combine it and mix it into making it into one mixture. So there isn't necessarily, like, all you have to do is mix like 1-to-1, 50-50, although because of the fact that this is a photosensitive and it's also a chemical like mixture, you don't want to mix any more than you're willing to use. So if you buy this whole set with these 2 bottles, don't think that you can mix them all together in one go and just have it ready for the next time that you want to use it, because the chemical mixture only stays stable for 2 to 4 hours. So within those 2 to 4 hours, you can use the same mixture to make prints, but if you want to do it one day and then the next, you're going to need to make a different solution. So because of the fact that you really don't need that much, because you're just going to be coating your paper. And to be clear, the material that we're going to be using is watercolor paper. This is some craft store-bought watercolor paper that I bought, and I just cut down to the size that I wanted it to be. So this is what we're going to be using. Watercolor paper is really important because watercolor paper is obviously meant to absorb liquid. So if you try this on other kinds of paper, it really won't sit well and it might warp it. So watercolor paper is a must. This is where I'm going to be mixing it, and this is just like, I'm just using household appliances as much as I can. So this is just a baking tin that I've used some tape to tape the back of it. And then inside is just where we're going to mix it in the baking tin. The reason why I have tinfoil on it is because tinfoil is going to reflect any light. So even though I'm in a dark space, just to keep it as dark as possible, I have this tinfoil. So whenever I'm not using it, I'll just keep it closed. But for now, we're going to do the actual mixture. So I just have a measuring cup. Again, the actual measurement itself doesn't matter. Make as much as you think you'll need and not any more. And I'm in dark lighting, but I'll still be careful. I'm going to pour my first solution into here. And now, inside. And I'm just eyeballing it. This is a 1/4 cup measuring cup, but really I'm just trying to eyeball the same amount. It does not have to be completely exact as long as it's within the same ballpark. Another thing too is make sure that you always have these lids on really tight. You don't want to accidentally leave them open and expose your chemicals. So now that we have the solution in here, I barely poured anything. I probably poured half of this 1/4 cup. I'm gonna make sure that the tape is really secure so no light that I don't want getting in gets in. And then in order to mix it without exposing it to any more light than I have to, I'm just gonna gently rock it back and forth like this. Another reason to put the tinfoil on is so you don't accidentally have any spill. But I'm just being very careful with it. Forward and backward. Making sure that it really mixes together. The only thing that would make this DIY process not work would probably be if you don't mix it enough. So if the chemicals aren't mixed well enough and they're like kind of separated, then that might be a problem. But I feel like this is mixed decently enough. So I'm actually going to take a minute to see if there's any questions about this. So Alex C says, can we use other materials as base instead of watercolor paper? Yes, you can. I recommend watercolor paper because it's really easy to get and buy a small amount of it. But other materials that you could use, the key is really absorbency. So the other method I'm going to show you uses fabric as the medium instead of paper. So you could absolutely buy some fabric so long as it's decently absorbent and decently thick. You could use that as a base instead of watercolor paper. Like muslin or canvas fabric would probably be really good because it's also sturdier. So I hope that answered that question. Let's see. Susan said, how long can each chemical stay viable after being mixed with water? You're not going to mix the chemicals with any water whatsoever. The only thing that I have in here right now is solution A and B, the two chemicals. You don't want to put any water into it. The only time I'll put any water in here is at the very end when I'm diluting it so I can rinse it down the sink or throw it into my garden. And somebody asked about the sensitizer brand. So before I move on to the next section, that'll be the last question, and then I'll move on to the next part. I'll get to more later. But the brand is called Jacquard, and it is Jaqurard. How stable are part A and part B solution once you put water in the bottles unused? They're stable. Once you put water in here, you can hold on to these for, I'd say about a year. I haven't known anybody who's lasted much longer, but so long as it's just the powder, so like solution A with water, and it stays unexposed to sunlight, it should hold and you won't have any issue. The only issue that you have with stability and of these chemicals breaking down is if they were to be mixed together, because then they can break down after about 2 to 4 hours. So I'm going to move on. We'll get to more questions later, but thank you for all of those. So now that I have it mixed to my satisfaction, not being able to see it, the next thing I'm going to do is, because I am using watercolor paper, I'm actually going to do what for me really is just personal preference because of the fact that I make art often. I have just this blue, well, this is purple painter's tape, but it's just the blue house painter's tape brand that Scotch makes. And I like to use this to kind of make a starting area of where I want to apply the photosensitive solution, because I like to have a little bit of a border of exposed paper or fabric when possible. So that way it can be framed more easily later on. And even though you put down this tape, it's not gonna be totally exact, which is fine. There's something really nice about the kind of soft, ragged edges that you'll get by making the photosensitive material by hand, which I like a lot. So again, this is entirely optional. It's just a personal preference of mine. But if you're interested, it's just some household paint tape. So now that I have my space laid out that I want to apply the chemical solution to, I'm going to get my brush. You can use any brush that you'd like. You can use a bristle brush, but I think that these sponge brushes work really well because you can avoid streak marks with them, and you can apply the chemical solution more evenly, which is what you want. You don't want the surface to look painted if you can help it, unless that's your preference that you're going for. So again, super cheap. This is probably 78 cents from Home Depot. You can also get them at craft stores. So next thing I'm gonna do is, even though I'm in a dim room, I'm still gonna be careful of exposing to light. And I'm gonna take my brush and just get it in there. I try to run it through the solution on both sides, and then I'm going to apply it. So I don't know if it's possible to see on this video, but if you can see that yellow, that's the chemical solution. So when you first mix it, it's this really bright yellow. And as it is exposed to sunlight, and air, it's going to oxidize and will turn green. Or I should say it's oxidized, becomes green. And so it'll become a green color once it has time to dry. But then when you take it outside and expose it to the sun, the UV will change the green to blue. So I have an even coat of yellow all across here. You want to be able to use your brush to avoid any like bubbles or buildup of the chemical in one place on the paper. Just to be thorough, I'm going to do a second coating to make sure that it's a really bright yellow. You don't want it to be too kind of pastel because you probably don't have enough on there. Better safe than sorry. You can't necessarily apply too much. The only way you could apply too much would be if you just absolutely drowned your paper in the liquid. So because there's more on here, it's starting to build up in corners. So I'm gonna brush it off. And to take some of that excess, I'm gonna dab it just on a rag nearby, just to make sure that it goes on even. So now it's all yellow. Again, I'm in dim lighting, so there's not an immediate risk of exposure. But this is what it'll look like when you've put the chemical solution on. This really bright yellow. It looks like highlighter yellow in the video. And next thing you want to do is you just want to let this dry, and just let it dry like any water wet paper would. I'm going to put mine inside of a little tinfoil folder, because even though I'm going to store this in a dark place, having a tinfoil layer on top of it will protect it from any accidental light. So just to be gentle. And so now, once you have it safely tucked away in your little tin foil, you're just gonna go and you're gonna put it in a dark place. I put mine in the laundry room closet, so just any dark corner or room will do. And I did a set of these this morning, and they dried in about 2 hours to be absolutely certain, but 2 to 3 to be safe. You'll be able to tell. But again, just be careful that when you peek at it, you try and keep it within your tin foil until you're ready to use it. So I'm going to check in again with some more questions and see if everybody understood that. I hope that I was thorough enough. Oh, I'm sorry. I did misunderstand your question. And when you asked, I believe, Shira, excuse me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. It looks very pretty. But I did say that you mix water into the powder in the bottle. So I misspoke, but yes, you mix powder into the water in the bottle, the solutions A and B, and then you take the solutions and you put them into the bowl. And as I think I answered earlier, having just the chemical powder mixed with water solution in the individual bottles, those will have a shelf life, they'll keep. You don't have to worry about them going bad or breaking down. You really just have to pay attention to, once you add them together, you're gonna have to throw that out eventually. Let's see. Daniela says, the darker the room is better. Yeah, I would say the darker the room is absolutely better. Natural light is definitely what you want to avoid the most. I turn off all of my unnatural lighting, all lamps and overhead lights. I mean, obviously you need to be able to see. So however dark that you can work while still being able to see your materials and your paper, that would be preferable. And let's see. Jennifer said, how long can you leave dried paper? You can leave dried paper for as long as you want, so long as it remains protected from light exposure. So you could make one of these, let it dry, put it on the shelf in its little tin foil folder, and it could stay there for days, weeks, years. So long as it hasn't been exposed to light, I'm pretty sure it'll still be usable. It just might not be as strong a print. And then Judith asked, was the sponge brush dry when I put it in the solution? Yeah, the sponge brush was dry. I would avoid having a wet brush, like with water, because if you accidentally get some water into the solution, then that might make your chemical solution weaker. So I'm gonna put the one that I just did off to dry. And because I'm not gonna have you sit here and watch chemicals dry, I made some earlier, and that's what we're gonna use next. So because I made some earlier for this demonstration, I did the exact same process that I just showed you. I'm just gonna get one of those out, the exact same size, and then we're gonna move on to actually getting ready to print. So I have them in little tinfoil folders as well, so they can be protected. And I did these at about 10 in the morning. So, okay, here's my little tinfoil. And I am going to be ready to print, but I still want to be careful about accidental exposure. So what I'm going to do is, I guess I should talk a bit about materials when you're making your prints before I actually arrange mine, because one I am so sorry, we just lost connection, or I think I just lost connection, but I'll just continue with what I was saying. I'm going to show you how to make a print doing a relief method, which is where you can use things like flowers, plants, shells, jewelry also works great. You can also use, I've seen people use things like jewelry, like necklaces and bracelets, and those show up also very strong. People will sometimes do kind of hand cut paper silhouettes and shapes and use those to make kind of like shadow puppet images. So when you're thinking, what can I use to make my print? You should just be thinking of two things, which is how flat is it? Because a three-dimensional object might not print as clearly because of the fact that it has more shadow and that not all of it will be directly on top of the print, the photosensitive material. So that can be a problem. And then the other thing to think about with your prints is silhouette. So even though you might really think an object is very beautiful, I have to remind myself with some of my pressed plants that even though the color is really beautiful, none of that's going to show up. So I just have to really think about the silhouette and the actual shape outline of it. And that's a good thing to think about. So I have some pressed plants. You absolutely don't have to press and dry your plants ahead of time. If you want to use flowers or leaves, you can pluck them. They're flat enough that they should be fine. But for the best result, I like pressing my plants several days, or in this case, I've had these pressed for several weeks, although it is that is definitely more than necessary. So I'm going to get out some of my pressed materials. I'm going to use just some pressed flowers and plants, and I'm going to arrange them on top of my ready to go dried photo exposed paper. So I'll put down the screen so you can see that. Once I arrange it in the order that I like, then I'm going to put it on a tray and get ready to go outside. So I'll talk more about that when I get there. So here we go. See how the yellow looks like a mossy green now? This is what it looks like once it's dried. You don't have to take the tape off now. You can take the tape off now if you want. I'm going to elect to leave it on, or actually, you know what? We'll just take it off. So just be careful when you take it off. It's painter's tape though, so should leave a clean edge. And I had my doubts, but this is actually a really clean edge so far. So I'm really happy with that. I did make a mistake in this one though, which is a good opportunity to talk about how to avoid doing that. Again, the good news is I'm in a room that's so dark that I can take more time. I don't have to worry so much about accidental exposure. staple. So here it is. It's a green color now, but you can see that there's these speckles in it, these dots. So it's not totally flat. And that's not supposed to be that way. I actually made a mistake. Somebody asked about, was my brush dry before I put it in? And what I had done earlier when I made this is that I had made a print before this one. And so my brush, when I went like this onto my cloth, it picked up some of that material, some of the little fluffy. And so these dots are actually the little fluffy material from my rag that got put onto my paper when it dried. So it's not a problem. It'll just be a little texture for the print, but just a word of warning, that can happen. So be careful that your brush is really clean before you use it. So I'm gonna arrange mine like that. I'm gonna get out my pressed plants, which are off to the side, just out of frame. It's hard to know exactly which one I want to use because they all turned out so good. This one is very pretty, and that might fit well. Even though it's a little too big for the area that I made, that's fine because obviously this white part won't be exposed and you won't see it. And I think actually this might look nice with the textured accidental dot background. And because it's a pressed plant, it's really flat. It has really clear lines. So I think it'll actually come out really nicely. I also have this really beautiful rose that was from my mom's Mother's Day bouquet, just to show it off because it's really pretty. So I have it arranged on my plate. The next thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to put it on a tray to take outside. And my tray is just a cookie sheet because that's what I have. And also because everybody has a cookie sheet. This is just gonna make it easier for me to carry outside. So that's the only reason why I'm doing it. I'm gonna put it on here, I'm gonna center it. So you could make your print just like this with just your relief item, which in this case is my pressed plant, or anything else that you can use, and then just your photosensitive material. But this is a recommendation on my behalf because I found that it makes for very clear and clean prints, and it can help you get those crisp lines in what you want to print. And that's by using a piece of clear glass, like the one I'm holding. This actually isn't glass, this is acrylic, so it's much more affordable and not so heavy. And I ordered this online, but there's also different venues that you could find one of these. They come in many sizes, but again, a piece of glass could work. I've also heard of people using just like transparent paper, the kind that you might use to like put files into or papers into in a binder. That could work too. But because this is heavier, it'll just help flatten everything so that you don't have shadows coming from a three-dimensional object. If you are going to use something like this on top, be sure that it's bigger than your plate or as big as your photosensitive material, because if it was shorter like this, where the edge is right here, this would actually cast a shadow. So you would have a line. Well, if this here on the photosensitive, you would have a line. So make sure that it's bigger than your photosensitive area. So I'm ready to go outside, but before I do, I'm just going to check in with everyone. Okay, so Ingrid asked about photography printed negatives. And actually, that's a perfect question because in my next method that I'm gonna get going as soon as we put this outside, I'm gonna show you how you can make a print using a photograph that you take or one that you have. And there's actually a really easy way, even if you don't have computer skills, there's a really easy way for you to do this because I'm not very good with a computer, but I was able to use these free resources online that made making a photo negative film really easy. So in terms of question about the photo negative, I'll cover that next when I do that process. So for now, I'm ready to go outside. I have my photosensitive material, my relief image, which is my pressed plant on top, and my clear acrylic. So now my very wonderful mother is going to pick up this laptop and we're going to go outside where it's going to be very bright in Texas. So I don't know if the camera is going to take a few seconds to adjust, but hopefully it won't. It'll be fine. Hello, we're outdoors. This is my backyard. This is a very cute garden. This is our print. So I have this on a table just so we don't do it in the grass. You could totally do it in the grass. But as far as exposing it to UV rays, I would absolutely implore you to go outside. Even if you think you have a bright window, nothing is going to be brighter than actually going outside. I'm going to try and talk louder so you can hear me because I'm farther away. So right now it's just in direct contact with the sun, and it's just going to sit here and it's going to continue to be exposed to the sun. Depending on how bright the sun is will determine how long the exposure process takes, but it should take no more than 15 minutes. It's a little bit overcast, but it's still pretty good. So we're going to let this sit for about 10, but don't worry, we're not actually going to sit out here for 10 minutes. I'm going to go get started on the next process. But I'm going to set a timer on my phone for 10 minutes so we can keep track. If it goes a little over 10, it's okay. A good rule of thumb with cyanotypes is that overexposure is much better than underexposure. Because at a certain point, it can only get so dark. So we have it set for 10. I'm going to check and see if there's any questions, and then we'll go back inside, and I'll actually get started on the prefab method, which is a lot quicker than this because you don't have to make your own photosensitive material. And then I'll also show you and talk to you about making a photo negative print using a photograph that you have or you found, you've taken. So I'll see if there's any questions. So Karen asked, what did I use to press the flowers down? So when I was actually pressing them themselves, I went out, I just plucked them from my neighborhood, my garden, things like that. And I just do the tried and true method of putting them between 2 paper towels and then putting them between 2 heavy books. I've done it recently. I did it where I took this nice kind of like wax paper that also works really well too, the wax paper, and I put it in between like 2 pieces of sandwich cardboard, and then I put heavy weights on top of it. Again, not necessary, but completely just at home, do it yourself. You want to have like a napkin or a piece, like a tissue. You want something in between, on top and below the plant before you press it, because you don't want any plant ooze getting onto a book if you're using it or whatever surface you're using to press it on. Let's see. Does it need to be a really sunny day? If you can, sunniest day possible is the best day. It's actually getting a lot brighter just in this moment, which is good. So I'll put it more into the sun. You want to avoid the shadow that's developing here. The sunniest possible is the best day possible. If it's overcast, then I would just save it for another day, but weather's still pretty good and holding out. So I think that's it. We're gonna let this continue to set. I'm gonna go inside and get started on the next process. And I'm gonna stagger them, but don't worry, I'll try and keep it really clear. So now we're going back inside. Wonderful curtain. Okay, thank you so much, my assistant, for once. She's helping me. Let's see, there's a quick question. So Danielle asks, can you do a double exposure? You could do a double exposure per se, but it has to be within that window of 5 to 15 minutes. So the way that you would do a double exposure would be, if I put that out there right now with that flower, and I want to let that sit for 15 minutes, then I could come in with a second layer, a second item, an overlay of some kind to block out the light, and I could put that on top. And if I wait 5 minutes, then that flower will be exposed for 15 minutes. And then that second object or layer will be exposed for 10. So that way, the one that's exposed for 10 will be less pronounced. It will be less dark, less stark, kind of like a ghost layer compared to the one that sat for more time. So I hope that answered that. So now I'm going to move on to the prefab method, which takes less time. Not that making your own paper isn't great. It is very fun, and it's enjoyable in the process. But if you don't really want to, if you just want to save some time, or for whatever reason it's more convenient for you to skip that step, there's a really great option to do pre-treated material. So the same brand that I got the photosensitizer set from, which is Jacquard, which you can buy from Blick, from Artisan Craftsman. You can get it from many online craft stores, or you can get it online from them. I promise I'm not promoting them. They're just a really reliable brand. And any artist will tell you that for cyanotypes, they are just the most reliable go-to. So they actually make a pre-treated fabric, which I'm going to show you. And it comes in a sheet that looks like this. This is the 8.5 by 11 size, which I think is really convenient because it's also printer paper sizes, which makes it easy for photo negatives. But these things come in as big as 5 feet, and they'll mail them to you in as big as 5 feet, which is really cool. And the first time I did cyanotypes, I did it on these ginormous sheets. Word of caution, if you do buy the pre-treated fabric that's any larger than 8.5 by 11, it will come folded. So you will have to iron it out first to avoid creases, because the creases will actually leave shadows. So you'll have this grid shadow marking. It'll be really faint, but if you don't want it there, it can be really bothersome. So you will have to iron it out if you buy the fabric sheets that are any larger than 8.5 by 11. And yes, you will have to iron them in the dark if possible. Please be careful. So that being said, these fabric sheets are awesome. They're so reliable every time. They come in their own UV exposure protected package. It looks like this. So before I get mine out, I'm just going to talk a bit about what I'm going to use to actually make the print, which is going to be a photo negative, since someone was asking about that. So for photo negatives, it's a really great, and it's a cool process. I haven't necessarily done it before. I learned how to do the photo negative process just for this workshop and did some earlier. It looked great, so I'm excited. And again, if you're not tech savvy, then the idea of having to make a photo negative can sound really daunting and hard, because for whatever image that you have, you're going to want to take that image. If it's a color picture, then you want to take the photograph and turn it into a black and white picture. So that way your values will come out really strong and it won't confuse the computer when you try and print. So black and white makes your darkest darks and your lightest lights. It comes for a much more exposed, a much better picture. So that's easy enough. The harder part though, if you're not very tech savvy, you don't have access to programs, is inverting it. So inverting it as in whatever was the darkest part of the image, the darkest darks, the shadows, that needs to be inverted so that that's white. Because this is a UV exposure process. So if you are, so to explain, I guess, with the relief, just for anyone who doesn't know or is unsure, probably should have covered it earlier. So with my plant out there, my plant that was pressed and sitting on the surface, that plant is blocking out the sun's light. So where the plant is sitting, the sun can't access. So because the photosensitive material that looks green right now becomes blue when it's exposed to sunlight. If it's not exposed to sunlight, then when it's printed, it's gonna remain white. So it's gonna be like a white silhouette, a white shadow of where this thing was. So that's why doing your photo negatives can be trickier, because you have to pay attention and remember that whatever you want to be white, when you make your negative, it's going to have to be black. And again, this all sounds daunting, but a really easy way to do it is, again, I promise I'm not a plug, it's just do what they do really well. But if you go to the Jacquard's website, you can actually type in Jacquard photo negative converter just into Google, and it'll pop up. And again, that's JAQUARD. And they have a super easy to use system where you can just upload a picture from your computer and you can click all of 2 buttons to make it black and white and then to make it into a negative. And you have some bars that you can switch to make the shadows darker or try to create more contrast or less contrast. But again, if you just quick and easy, go to that site, put in your picture, make it black and white, invert it. They do all the hard work for you, especially if you don't know anything about tech. The next part about doing a photo negative is that you obviously can't print it just on printer paper. You have to print it on transparent paper. And that was the only thing that I found more challenging. So I'm just going to show you the photo negative that I made. Actually, I made a couple. So I'll show you the one that we're going to use, which is this one. Might be easier to see it like this. So this is an x-ray of my skull that I got from my dentist's office because I have a great many piercings in my ears and my nose. I don't know if you can really see on this video, but when you do an x-ray, you can see all of them, and I think it's really amusing. So I have this, and this is printed on this transparent paper here. So whatever was white just doesn't print because your printer doesn't bother printing white. It only prints anything but white, really. So printing only the black gives you transparent like this. So obviously in a normal x-ray, the actual skull would appear white, and this is why it's black. I have some more I can show you just to give you some more examples. Oh, that's the timer for 10. It's okay, still has 5 more minutes, but we'll get out there soon. This is another one that I did, and you can't see it, but this is actually a paper, even though it looks totally dark. So I want this paper to be bright white, which is why it's completely black. So another example. Now, the way that you print this is there's special paper, which is, the paper that I used is another Jacquard product, because again, so good, inexpensive, consistent every time. It's called Solar Fast Film, like one word, Solar Fast Film. It's really great. It's only $15 for 8 sheets, which is a pretty good deal for art supplies. And it's compatible with inkjet printers. So you just need to load it into your inkjet printer and use the file that you inverted online, and it prints just like that onto this transparent paper. You can't, unfortunately, use the kind of transparent paper that you would get from Home Depot because it doesn't grip the ink like this one does. This actually has a tacky surface that holds onto the ink and makes it stay. And also it prints a lot smoother. So I'm sorry that was so long-winded, but this is a more complex technical component if you want to do it. So I just wanted to make sure that I spoke about it thoroughly. Oh, and here's a picture of what the Solar Fast film and the package looks like. Really wonderful, really easy to get. So I'm gonna see if there's any questions about the solar negative, and then all I'm gonna do is put it on top of my pre-treated fabric, take it outside. So Maricela asked if we're not able to buy the Jacquard brand, then what are the names of the chemicals used? Wonderful question. I should have told you. I'll just reiterate. So if you're not buying the set, which is completely fine, the part A solution is going to be potassium ferricide, and the part B solution is ferric ammonium citrate. I'm going to say that one more time because they're big words. And if someone's taking notes, I want them to be able to. So potassium ferricyanide, part A, part B is ferric ammonium citrate. Nan asked if I cleaned the dirt off the plants before drying them. No, I didn't. I like my dirt on them. I like digging around in the dirt, so no, that turns out right. If there is dirt on them, when the plants dry, any dirt will like usually fall off anyways, so you have like little speckles like dust on your paper, and that's the dirt. And then Judith asked, is transparent paper same as acetate? So it's similar to acetate, but it actually is not exactly the same. So if you just go to a store and you buy acetate, it's not going to work in the same way because this is a paper that is especially made for this kind of transparent film printing. So you don't have to use the Solar Fast film specifically by brand, just letting you know what I used, but you can just like look online, and there's other brands, other products that are specifically inkjet transparent paper. So you want to make sure that when you're looking up transparent paper that you pay attention to its printer compatibility. LaserJet won't work because LaserJet uses heat, and the heat will melt the acetate-like plastic. So it has to be an inkjet printer, unfortunately. Another thing that you could do, though, is you could get transparent paper, not the photosensitive, the negative kind that I'm talking about. If you just got any transparency and you used a opaque marker, like an oil-based Sharpie or a paint marker, you could just draw onto it, and then you can make a print using handwriting or just hand-drawn drawings. I won't go into that, though, because we are going to get outside. Let's see, Susan and Anne-Marie did ask me questions related to photo negative, and I promise I'll get to them outside. I just want to get out there so we can get our timing right. So I'm just going to take out one of the sheets. I'll show you what I'm doing. I don't have another tray, so we're just going to put it on the box, which is totally fine. It's protected in here. And when you open them, they all are green because they've already been treated and dyed. So it's this actually really pretty green color. Let me close that little bar so I can see what I'm doing. Anyways, so here it is. I'm going to take my photo negative, which is the same size as the paper, 8.5 by 11. Oh, actually, I'm going to use this one because it's fun. Position it where you want it. Try and keep it straight if you can. If you can't, not the end of the world. You can always cut the paper. So I have it set up now. My acrylic sheet is still outside, which is okay. I'll just put it outside when I switch out the two prints because the other one is just about being exposed. So in the meantime, since I don't want this to print just yet until I can get the acrylic on it, I'm just going to cover it up. And now we're going to go back outside. And I'm going to show you how to finish off the print that we already set outside while this one bakes, is exposed. So I'm going to switch out the acrylic from the first one onto the second one so we can start. I'm going to place it down. I'm just readjusting the paper because it shifted. I'm doing this very quickly because it's already starting to expose. Like this. Remove this, the plant. This is how it looks right now. What I just did is I took that print that we did the first time and I submerged it in a little pail of water that's right under this table. I'm gonna get this one set up. I have the acrylic on top. Acrylic on top, photo negative. It's gonna start baking for another 10 minutes. I had taken my plant off of the print, and like I said, I put it in some water underneath this table. So now we're gonna crouch down on the ground, and I'm gonna explain why we're doing that, but it's here. So I'm gonna put on a glove. Again, it won't hurt you, but just to be careful about not wanting to get the chemicals just for the sake of color and dye on your clothes. You can use a glove. So I have this pail of water. I'm trying to put it under the table to keep in the darkness. If it's done in the light, it's not a terrible thing. It won't ruin it, but you do get a darker print, a darker blue, if you keep in the darkness. So there's a little shadow coming in, which is why I'm moving this back there, so that I don't expose this any more than I already wanted to. So the reason why you put it in the water after you print it is because you want to wash off that chemical that was on the paper in the first place. So this is how the paper will leave a blue and white print and not a blue and green print. So you put it in the water and that washes away the unexposed chemical. Washing it away just leaves the white of the material behind, Or you can do this process on a colored paper or colored fabric. Just keep in mind that you're working with blue. So if I did this on a light red paper, a light green paper, then it would just leave behind the color of the material, in this case, paper or fabric. So I feel like I've adequately gotten the water off of that. You want to use a clean bucket of water each time that you do this. So I wash it out in between prints. Because it's paper, I don't want to just leave it in the water. So again, being careful to keep it in the dark because I don't want to accidentally expose it. I'm just gonna put this on this cookie sheet, and now I'm going to cover it up with a paper towel or something to block out the light. I'm going to cover it up. I'm going to take it back inside so it can dry in the dark. Again, you want to keep it in the dark for the drying time because that's going to help that deep blue color set in and set in consistently without any variation. So I'm going to cover it. Do this. And this isn't going to rub off on it. So. Well, this is exposing. I'm just going to go take it. And we're going to keep talking outside while that other one sets. So I'm just going to go put this in the dark, in a dark closet, and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. And don't worry, I will show you that print before this demo is over. I'm just gonna give it some time to, well, the proper word being to settle. It's not gonna rub off. So the blue, if it's wet, if the paper is wet, the fabric's wet, the blue isn't gonna rub off onto anything, but because it's a chemical process, it does need time to sit or to bake to achieve its like final permanent hue of blue, which is why if you put it into a dark room, you don't have any light variations, so that'll help it dry just a flat, like matte blue. So that's why I did that. But I will take it out and I'll put it into the dark room and I'll be able to show you that because it actually came out really nice. So that one is still baking, the one where we used the photo negative. I'm really excited about it. I'm really excited about this one. It just seems fun. But we're gonna keep baking. I'm gonna answer some questions. And then we're gonna do the exact same thing where I'm gonna take the fabric that's been exposed and I'm gonna put it into the water to wash off the chemicals and then take it back inside. So let's answer some questions. Okay, so Anne-Marie, you did ask a question. I told you I'd get back to you. It says, can you print transparency with a regular printer or do you need an Epson Canon? You can print with a regular printer per se, but the thing that you absolutely need is you need an inkjet, not a laser jet. Again, because the laser jet, the heat will melt the plastic film. Susan asked that when using a negative, would it be better to purchase a frame that clamps the transparency down firmly and doesn't move? You could do that. That's a wonderful idea. I'm using the acrylic sheet, which again is only recommended. It's not necessary. With a negative, using the flat transparency, you already are going to get a very clear, crisp print because it's a totally flat paper as opposed to a pressed plant or a fresh plant, which even though it's really thin, is still going to have some dimension to it. So do you need it? Do you absolutely need it? No. But if you'd like to do it, I like to do it just for consistency and getting really crisp, clear prints. You can use the acrylic. I used it because it's inexpensive and more easily accessible. You could use a frame to clip down and like really press it down if you wanted to. You could also probably use just some painter's tape. And if your negative is bigger than the actual material, whether it be paper or fabric, you could just tape that down on either side so it stays nice and flat. Hope that's a good answer. See, Becky asked, if you have a black and white negative, should you use it or preferably make another scan copy and create a new transparency? If you already have a black and white negative, you should absolutely be fine. Because again, the reason why using an inkjet printer is that your printer is not going to print white ink. It's only going to print black. So if you're using a printer and you have the transparent negative paper, and the only thing that's special about it is that it's meant to hold ink in a fine art quality way, so not being splotchy, dots of ink, being more smooth and consistent and really holding it, not getting smudged off. No, so you don't have to make a new one. If you already have a black and white negative, you should be fine to use it. Z. If you need a little light to work, which do you say is safer, artificial or natural light? Would you use a red light to be entirely safe? A red light would be safe. Any conditions that you would use for a photography UV darkroom would be safe for this process. And if I had to choose a light source, if I needed one, I would choose, I guess, artificial, but a very dim artificial light. The way that I was lighting my living room was that I had closed my curtains, and I had closed my blinds, but I left the blinds open just enough that a little bit of natural light was coming through, but that was across the room from me, not right in front of me. Can the actual photographic negative be used without damaging the emulsion on the negative? I honestly just don't know the answer to that. I am a painter and a printmaker more so than I am a photographer. So I have to be honest and say I can't necessarily answer a question about using a photography photonegative emulsion. So I'm sorry about that. Maria asked, is that plain water? Yep, it's just water that came out of the hose. And then are Cyanotype prints permanent on fabric? Asked by April. Yes, they are. Once you wash it and you let it set, after a 24-hour period, they will be totally permanent. Let's see. Looking at some other questions. The print is just about exposed, so we'll go check on that. So Becky asked, the chemicals on the dry paper won't ruin the negative at all. I have never heard of that happening, so no. These chemicals are very safe. They're not corrosive. The worst thing about them is just their really stubborn color, the dye that happens as a result of them, but they're not corrosive, so they shouldn't be an issue to have the negative come into contact with the photosensitive paper. Okay, let's see. I think that the photo is just about done. The print is just about exposed. So I'm gonna go handle that, wash it off again, and then we'll take some more questions, try and clear up any inconsistencies I might have said. Because I did not sit and babysit my print, unfortunately, the shadow did move a little bit and the lights changed a bit. Someone did try to warn me of that in the questions. Thank you for that. I unfortunately did not see it, but thank you for trying. If you sit and babysit your print, hopefully this won't happen. But I'm optimistic that because it wasn't a really harsh shadow, it was just kind of shaded, it won't be a problem. So I'm now going to take it and I'm gonna dip it back into the water. This plate is very hot because it's metal. Now, let me close that screen so I can make sure that you can see. Now, ideally, you would want to change your water in between prints, but because I'm doing small prints, and I have so much water, this just tap water that I used isn't getting so dirty yet from the runoff chemicals. Like when it's really green, like it is right now, that's when it's like, oh, okay, time for water change. But using secondhand, like if you made one print before and you do this one like I did, a second one, it's not gonna hurt it. the water is just to wipe off the emulsion that you don't want, or my bad, the photosensitive chemical emulsion that you don't want, so that you have a blue and white print. Looking at it just in the water, I don't think too much of a problem because it was very faint. And this photo negative is actually looking really good, which I promise I will let you see. I'm just gonna put it on a tray, take it back inside. I have a little bit of the chemical on my leg, on these pants right here. It's so faint, but it's there. When I'm done with this demo, I will just throw these in the washing machine, and because it's so faint, just hope for the best. But also just be careful wearing an apron, don't be like me. Use this one to cover it from the sun. Keep it as dark as possible. Usually I would just go let this sit in a dark room, but because I want you guys to be able to see how they look like before we end this demo, I'll keep this one out and go get the other one. It won't hurt them because the room is so dark. I'm just gonna clean up after myself here to make for a more efficient demo. I'm also gonna put down this piece of white paper so you can see the prints better, as opposed to the gray metal. Again, have these lie flat so that you don't get wrinkling or warping. So for the photo negative, this one was exposed for less time than the relief print was. So this has a lighter blue color than the other one does, which is okay. I think the cyan blue is really beautiful. Of course, the cyan blue is where this process actually gets its name. This print will get darker though. I just pulled it out from the sun. So this is as light as it will look. It will get slightly darker, although not more than maybe 2 shades. It won't get much darker than the relief print. I'll show you. But sorry for the noise. So here's how the photo negative came out. And it's pretty crisp. It's pretty clear. Overall, I'm very happy with it. I think because of the fact that I was using such a stark black and white image with not a lot of value range, it came out really strong. I will show you a print I did earlier using that separate transparency so you can see what that looked like. But here's this fresh out of the sun in the bath and all that stuff. The next one I'm going to show you is a photo negative print that I did earlier today around 3 o'clock. And this one I exposed for close to 20 minutes. It came out really dark. So I probably would have benefited from leaving it outside for only 10 minutes, 15 at the most. It just came out really dark, which isn't a print going wrong. It's just certain images you want to be lighter so that they can show more value range than others. So this one is the other photo negative. Ooh. Sorry about that. So you can see how that little paper of the fortune cookie, that's what it is, came out really white. But because I left it out for so long, this photo negative that I had, I could have probably pushed the contrast more. I probably exposed it for a little too long, so I lost kind of those middle blue colors. So that's just better technique, not leaving it out for so long. And also, this wasn't the best file photo, so it could have also been better. But overall, I still like it. I'm still gonna probably try and print this one again and just leave it out for less time. The last one I'm gonna show you is actually the first print that we did together, which is the relief one, using a photosensitive material that I made myself, the same process that you can make by mixing your own chemicals. And that's with the pressed plant. And this one, again, it's a dark blue, but I really like it. I think this one came out. This has also had, again, this one has been sitting for a little bit in the room, so it's had a chance to get a little bit darker. And this is the pressed plant one, which I personally really like. I really like it a lot. I think it came out really good. But a good flower, a good plant will do that for you. So I will take some more questions to make sure that I explained everything thoroughly and that I didn't convolute things by contradicting myself, which I might have and probably did. But without waiting around to hear me answer more questions, which you're welcome to, this concludes the actual demonstration portion. So the only other step that there is that I would take all of these prints, I would put them into a dark room or closet, and I would just have them sit undisturbed for 24 hours until this time tomorrow. And I would have dry paper or fabric and a totally permanent print. So if this is where you're signing off now, then thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you'll check out some of the MoCP's other online programming that they're doing, and hopefully come see us if you're able to when it's safe to do so. So thank you, and I'll just get to answering some questions now. I'm gonna sit on my knees. Okay, let's see. Eva asked, then if I wet the paper to use watercolor afterwards, after 24 hours, it won't damage the print. First of all, that's a really cool idea. I had never considered that. That's awesome. And second of all, to answer your question, actually, no, it won't. If you wait 24 hours, even having used watercolor paper, 24 hours, the print is permanent, settled, it's dry. You could very well use that same watercolor paper and apply a new material onto it. Anything oil-based like a pastel or chalk, but you could even do watercolor painting. I don't know how well it would turn up on over the top of the blue, but you could absolutely still work with this paper and it won't affect the print itself. I think some gouache would look nice because it's more opaque. Let's see, another question. Judith asked, regarding fabrics, should it be 100% cotton? I think you mentioned muslin. Yes, it doesn't have to be 100% cotton. It can be a mixture, but you definitely, if it's not 100%, you would want it to be a mix. The best result would be 100% because that really holds the chemical solution well. And also, it's a coarser fabric. 100% cotton is coarser. So it will also help with kind of blocking out any accidental light that you don't want. The only fabrics that I've heard of people using have been cotton mixtures that have been like some percentage cotton, muslin, canvas. I would be interested if there could be other fabrics used, but again, it would have to be an absorptive fabric. Anything that was like too silicone, nylon, artificial base, I don't think it would hold. It wouldn't hold the chemical, and I don't think it would hold the print that well, but I would love for you to prove me wrong. Let's see. Ruth Ann asked, did I put the digital negative sticky side down? Yes, I did. So in the terminology of using the solar fast film or any photonegative printing paper, the side that is tactile and will pick up the ink on the packaging is referred to as the sticky side, which I think is confusing. But I printed on the sticky side, which is so when I put it into my paper, when I put the paper into my printer, there's a smooth side that feels like a plastic or an acetate, and there's another side that feels more like it has more tackness to it. It doesn't feel as smooth, so sticky, some might call it. I put that face down into my printer because that's how my printer loads. so that when it printed, it would come back up like that and print on the sticky side. So when I did the print just now, I put the sticky side down, which is like the darker side. Let's see. Maria commented saying that I think with the real photo negative, you can put the non-emulsion side down just in case. I would tend to agree with you. Again, once this chemical solution has dried onto your fabric or your paper, it's not caustic, and I don't think it would have any effect on an emulsion if it was on a photo, like a photography negative, as opposed to what I did, which is printing using a printer. Anne-Marie asked, if you don't have a red bulb, you can place, oh, Anne-Marie did not ask. They insightfully commented, if you don't have a red bulb, you can place several layers of wax paper that you have colored red with a marker to dim the light by placing it over a small light. I've never attempted that. And I would feel like I've never attempted that. And I just wouldn't want to speak on something I haven't attempted personally and know for a fact. If you're worried about what the right setting is for a photo sensitive process, then you can always look online for suggestions. There's lots of artists who are more on the photography side and would probably have answers regarding the specific light. But also, you don't need it to be a pitch black room. In fact, the lighting on this camera makes this room look probably darker than it really is being here in person. You just really don't want to have, like, I have a really thick curtain covering this glass window here, so like no light is coming in. But I do have my blinds. My blinds are closed, but obviously there's still some light coming through the closed blinds. So it's not totally dark, like I can still very clearly see, but I don't have any like strong direct light coming from any direction. Susan asked, how long do you need to rinse the paper in clean water? I would say give it at least 30 seconds to a minute. A good way to know when you've rinsed it enough is going to determine by size. So if I had used a larger photosensitive material, like a larger piece of paper or a larger piece of fabric, then I would probably wash it for longer than I did, maybe a full minute, because it's just more material to work with. Something smaller will take less time. A good way to know when you've washed it thoroughly enough is that this is dependent on you starting with clean water. If you start with clean water and you put in your print, the more that you wash it, the more green the water will become. So if you keep gently washing it over with your hand, gloved or not gloved, it won't hurt you. If you keep washing it over, the water will get progressively more green. Once it gets to a point where it's not getting any more green, then you're probably good. It doesn't take much. So I hope that answered that question. It really is like probably for bigger, like if you're doing a really big print, it can be as much as 5 minutes for like a really big one, like the 5 feet ones I was working with as a studio assistant. But 18 by 24, be definitely less than 5 minutes, maybe 2 minutes, just to cover all your ground, just gently washing it. Okay. Let's see, someone asked me if I've done this in a climate with less intense sun, like New York, Chicago, Seattle. I have only attempted this kind of process here in Texas, where we have an abundance of really strong direct rays, which is great. Although in Chicago, you can do this, you can do it just as well, you can get just as good of a print. Obviously, you just have to pay attention to your weather, no cloudy days. If you live in the city, then a really great place to go would be a rooftop if you have access, because you're gonna get really direct and brutal sun there if you're doing this on one of Chicago's really beautiful sunny days. And keep answering questions. Can you paint with ink on acetate to make a negative? You can use acetate to make a negative without the printing process or a photo process. But it's not so much, like not all inks will work. What you need is a really thick, opaque substance. So something like an oil-based pen or a paint pen. So you could use Sharpie, you can't just use a regular Sharpie, but Sharpie has a line of pens that are oil-based Sharpies, and those will work to block out the light. Another really good one would be a Molotow paint pen, although those are on the more expensive side, just being aware of price considerations, but those also work really well. They're a paint pen. I wouldn't say using ink, but what you could do if you wanted to apply, if you wanted to make a photo negative with acetate by hand, you could use acrylic paint. Acrylic paint will be fast drying, and it would also be opaque enough if you applied it in a thick enough layer that you could make your own hand-drawn negative. Susan asked if I could wash the Cyanotype printed fabric with detergent after it's set. I've never heard of anyone washing their Cyanotype with an actual cleaning solution. I've only ever heard of people like washing it another round in water after they do the initial print. I don't know an answer to that. I've just personally have never known someone to attempt it, but you can definitely find an answer to that online. Community artists is really, really great. Let's see. Alex asked if you can print on a piece of wood. You probably, I don't know, you probably could. It would depend on the wood. It would have, I imagine something that would be like a really fine grain, like balsa would probably be better suited, because something that has a really coarse grain or isn't as finished would probably have difficulty absorbing and really like holding the chemical solution in place. Really awesome idea though. I wish I personally have done that. Maybe I'll try it. Let's see. Is the coating acid-free, museum quality when dry? I would think that it's like relatively, not 100%, but it's relatively low. It's not entirely acid-free, but it's not terribly acidic. But because you are printing onto paper, into fabric particularly, I would not say that it's museum archival quality just as soon as you print it. But there's lots of different fixatives that you can apply after the fact. You could do a fixative bath with more liquid kind to help make this a museum quality, like archival print, or you could do a spray fixative. I've used those before on the paper kind, and that helps a lot. Someone asked, can you print a photo negative using the DIY material? Absolutely. There is absolutely nothing that you can't do with the DIY yourself method. With like, all you're doing is just mixing your own chemicals, making your own material. Versus the prefab, all the prefab does is save you some time, but there's nothing that you can't do with one or the other. I could have used the photo negative on that. I just chose not to because I wanted to show a variety of methods with like what I was printing with and how I was making them. Susan said that they've used silk to make a cyanotype print and it worked really well. For some reason, I had some feeling that silk, I feel like I've seen that before, and that sounds really beautiful. So yes, silk is an option. I imagine because it's so fine, it can hold on to solution. That sounds really beautiful. Let's see. Becky asked what kind of trays to wash finished prints. We're just using for large 5 feet prints. Okay, so for the 5 feet prints, we did not use a tray because there was no tray big enough for a 5 feet print. Instead, what we did is we got a fairly large bucket, like just an industrial bucket, a metal bucket, a plastic bucket, as long as it's a clean bucket. And we put the bucket underneath a running hose or running faucet, and we actually crumpled the print up. We balled it gently, and we put it into the bucket with the running water. And we rinsed it and we wrung it out like you would with your laundry. It was just a pain in the neck to take it back out once it had been like wrung and like gently folded. Then we had to make sure that we laid it out flat, really flat, because it was fabric and it would have had just some wrinkles that we wouldn't want to deal with later because it was so big. But it worked really well. That one did take like a full 5 minutes to rinse out though, because it was bundled and because it was so much. So that took longer just to make sure that everything got washed. John asked, have I ever tried Solar Fast? And yes, I have tried Solar Fast. Solar Fast film is actually the exact film that I use to make my negatives as someone who is a tech, not tech experienced, but it worked really well and it's really affordable. Maria asked, does Jacquard make pre-sensitized paper as well? Jacquard, as far as I'm aware, which is pretty aware, they only sell pre-treated fabric because Jacquard has a more traditional approach to it, and they only make pre-treated fabric. I think if you have access to the pre-treated fabric, the fabric print is quite lovely. So unfortunately, they don't make a paper, but they do sell a sensitizer set that you can use to make photosensitive paper. The fabric is very lovely, though. Okay, I think that is it on recent questions. So if on recent questions I can answer to the best of my ability. If there's no new questions, then I think this will be a conclusion. However, if after we finish this demonstration here and you have more questions that you want to ask, or you just felt like your questions couldn't be asked in this format, it's just too lengthy, too convoluted, you can email me. I would be happy to answer emails and give you thorough, in-depth answers to questions, or you can teach me something. So if you want to email me with more questions after this demonstration, then my email address is sheridynv@gmail.com, and that's going to be my name, SHERIDYNV@gmail. So again, feel free to contact me. I hope that this was I really hope this was an informative demonstration. Really hope that it was easy to understand and that I covered multiple bases for different ways to use this print just as an introduction. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you for supporting the museum, and thank you for supporting art.